I used to believe noise meant life, that if I filled every corner of my apartment with sound, podcasts murmuring through tinny speakers, traffic hissing through a cracked window, the refrigerator's low animal hum, I could convince myself I was still connected to something human. I lived in a one-bedroom box stacked among thousands of others on the outskirts of a city whose name no longer mattered. Somewhere in the lower 48. Somewhere interchangeable. Glass, concrete, light pollution, and the dull, constant awareness that time was slipping past me without resistance. My job paid well enough. That was the phrase everyone used, as if adequacy were a virtue. I managed logistics data for a regional distribution company, which meant staring at screens full of numbers that represented things I would never touch: pallets of frozen meat, pharmaceutical shipments, temperature deviations flagged in polite red warnings. Every day I sat under fluorescent lights that never flickered but always buzzed, my body folded into an ergonomic chair like an apology. I spoke to people through headsets and email threads, my voice reduced to efficiency, my thoughts shaved down to bullet points. At night, I scrolled. News, photos, other people's lives curated into moments of false clarity. Smiling faces at weddings, raised glasses, sunsets filtered until they looked unreal. I would catch my reflection in the dark screen between refreshes, 34 years old, eyes dulled, skin pale from artificial light, a man shaped by indoors. Sleep came badly. When it did, it brought dreams without images, just sensations. Pressure, cold, the feeling of being stored somewhere vast and quiet like an object forgotten on a shelf. I told myself I was tired, burned out, that this was normal. But the truth was simpler and worse. Nothing I did seemed to leave a mark. I moved through days like a ghost haunting a life that belonged to someone else. My hands were soft. My back never ached from honest work. My mind was always occupied, but never engaged. I was busy in the way a machine is busy. The breaking point came on a Tuesday, which felt appropriate. Tuesdays had always been the most meaningless day of the week, too far from rest to anticipate, too close to routine to resist. I was sitting in a meeting about revised cold chain protocols when my supervisor's voice faded into abstraction. Her mouth moved, slides advanced, acronyms piled up, and suddenly I was aware with painful clarity that I could vanish from this room and nothing essential would change. The thought didn't scare me, it relieved me. That night, I didn't turn anything on. No screens, no music. I sat in the dark and listened to the city breathe. Sirens in the distance, an argument through thin walls, the elevator cables sighing like old lungs. For the first time in months, I let the silence between sounds stretch without filling it. In that silence, a question surfaced, quiet but insistent. What would it take to feel real again? I didn't want comfort. I didn't want convenience. I wanted resistance. Weight. Cold air that burned my lungs. Work that demanded my body as payment for my existence. Somewhere the world did not care about my opinions or preferences, only whether I followed its rules. I opened my laptop and searched without much intention. Remote jobs. Seasonal work. Places people went when they were running towards something instead of away. The listings blurred together until one caught, snagging my attention with its starkness. Cold storage facility technician, Northern Alaska, rotational shifts, on-site housing, extreme conditions. I clicked. The description was blunt, almost unfriendly. Sub-zero temperatures, isolation, strict adherence to protocols, long periods without external contact during winter months. The pay was modest, the benefits minimal. The language carried no promises of fulfillment, only survival. I felt something then. Not excitement, something steadier. Like recognition. I imagined the cold, not the novelty of snow days or holiday imagery, but real cold, the kind that stripped things down to essentials. Cold that preserved, cold that punished mistakes, cold that demanded attention. I read the requirements twice. No prior Arctic experience necessary, willingness to relocate, psychological resilience, respect for rules. Rules I understood. My whole life had been rules disguised as freedoms. I submitted my application before doubt could intervene, closed the laptop, sat back and waited for regret to bloom. It didn't. In the days that followed, my city life began to feel unreal, as if I were already halfway gone. Conversations drifted past me. My apartment looked like a hotel room I'd overstayed. When the email came, brief, professional, accepting, I read it 3 times to be sure. Start date, early winter. Location details to follow. Prepare accordingly. That night, for the first time in years, I slept deeply, dreamless, heavy. I didn't know what waited for me in Alaska. I only knew that whatever rules governed that frozen place, they had teeth. And that was exactly what I needed. I packed light. I told no one more than necessary. And when I boarded the plane heading north, watching the lights of the city recede into a meaningless constellation below, I felt the noise finally begin to fade. The farther north the plane traveled, the quieter the world became. It wasn't an absence of sound so much as a thinning, like the atmosphere itself was losing interest in carrying human noise. By the time we crossed into Alaska, the cabin felt subdued, voices lowered, movements economical. The other passengers, oil workers, contractors, a few locals with weathered faces, had the look of people accustomed to places that did not explain themselves. I watched the land change through the small oval window. Forests thickened, then broke apart into long stretches of white and gray. Rivers froze mid-gesture, caught in winding lines beneath the snow. Roads grew scarce. Towns, when they appeared at all, seemed provisional, as if they could be packed up and removed without argument. We landed in Anchorage under a sky the color of old steel. The cold hit me immediately, not as a shock, but as a presence. It pressed against my skin through layers of fabric, testing for weakness. I welcomed it. Every breath felt deliberate, earned. From Anchorage, I transferred to a smaller plane, then a helicopter. Each step deeper into the state felt like shedding another layer of my old life. Cell service disappeared. Then even the illusion of proximity to anything familiar. The helicopter's rotors chopped the air into submission as we flew over a vast, frozen expanse that resisted comprehension. No fences, no landmarks I could name, just distance. When the facility finally came into view, it looked wrong. Not threatening, at least not overtly, just out of place. A cluster of low, industrial buildings squatting on the tundra like a thought that refused to be forgotten. The structures were painted a dull, utilitarian gray, their edges softened by snowdrifts that leaned against the walls like exhausted animals. No windows on the largest building, just metal, vents, and a single loading bay door sealed shut. We landed on a cleared pad a short distance away. The pilot didn't linger. He helped unload my single duffel, gave me a nod that felt more like a dismissal than a greeting, and lifted off without waiting for thanks. The sound of the rotors faded quickly, swallowed by the open land. The silence that followed was absolute. It rang in my ears, a high, thin pressure that made me acutely aware of my own breathing, my heartbeat. I stood there longer than necessary, turning slowly as if expecting the landscape to react to my presence. It didn't. The cold storage facility existed alone, self-contained, uninterested in being observed. A man emerged from one of the smaller buildings and raised a hand in greeting. He moved with the stiff economy of someone who had learned not to waste motion in the cold. Thick coat, heavy boots, face lined and reddened by years of exposure. When he reached me, he studied my face for a moment longer than politeness required. "You're early," he said. I checked my watch out of habit, then remembered time was already becoming irrelevant. The transport lined up that way. He nodded, as if that explained everything. "I'm Grant, I'll get you settled." He took my bag without asking and started toward the nearest building. I followed, my boots crunching loudly on the packed snow. The sound felt intrusive, a violation of the quiet. Inside, the air was warmer but no less dry. The building served as living quarters, Spartan, functional. A narrow hallway, a common room with bolted-down furniture, a kitchenette that looked unused more often than not. Grant showed me to my room, a bed, a desk, a locker. No decorations, no mirror. "Orientation's tomorrow," he said. "For now, get some rest. Jet lag hits harder up here." There was something else he wanted to say. I could see it in the way his eyes lingered, the way his mouth tightened and relaxed. But he only nodded once and left me alone. I unpacked mechanically. My belongings looked strange in the small room, like props from a different play. When I lay down, I could feel the cold through the walls, a constant, low seep that never quite reached discomfort but never left either. That night, I dreamed again. This time there were images. Vast shelves stretching into darkness, stacked high with indistinct shapes wrapped in frost. I walked between them, my footsteps muffled, my breath fogging the air. Somewhere far away, something shifted. Slow, deliberate. I woke with my heart racing, the impression of being watched clinging to me like a residue. Morning came without ceremony. The sky remained gray, the light flat and diffuse. Grant met me in the common room with a clipboard and a mug of something dark and bitter. "Rules first," he said, handing me a laminated sheet. "Memorize them." The list was short: safety protocols, temperature thresholds, access permissions, all practical, all reasonable, except for the last three. Never enter Storage Wing C alone. If you hear movement from inside a sealed unit, report it. Do not investigate. Do not wear red inside the facility. I looked up. Red? Grant's expression didn't change. Colors matter in low light. Red shows up differently. That felt insufficient, but I nodded. I had followed worse rules for flimsier reasons. He led me across the yard to the main building. Up close, the scale of it became apparent. The walls rose higher than I'd thought, the metal skin scarred and pitted by decades of weather. The door opened with a hydraulic hiss, exhaling a breath of air so cold it felt alive. Inside, the temperature dropped sharply. My eyelashes stiffened. The lights were dimmer here, recessed and shielded, casting long, static shadows. Rows of storage units extended into the distance, their surfaces rimed with frost. Each unit was labeled, cataloged, contained. "This place runs 24/7, Grant said. Cold doesn't sleep." As we walked, I became aware of a sound beneath the hum of machinery. A deep, almost imperceptible resonance, like the echo of something vast shifting far below. "What's stored here?" I asked. Grant stopped and looked at me, really looked this time. His eyes were clear, unflinching. "Things people don't want to lose," he said, "and things they don't want to remember." He turned and continued on, leaving me to follow, the rules heavy in my pocket and the cold pressing in from all sides. For the first time since I'd arrived, I felt a flicker of unease. Not fear, recognition. Work began the way most honest labor does, with repetition. Grant walked me through the facility's daily operations, his explanations precise, unembellished. Temperature checks every 2 hours, physical inspections of seals and hinges, inventory audits logged by hand and digitally, redundancy layered on redundancy. The cold storage units were arranged in long corridors, each wing separated by heavy bulkhead doors that closed with a final hydraulic certainty. Wing A, Wing B, Wing C. The labels were stenciled in black, the paint chipped and faded by time and frost. Wing C remained closed, not locked, sealed. The door bore no keypad or handle, only a recessed panel with a warning placard bolted into the metal. Maintenance access only. Even the air around it felt different, denser, as if sound itself slowed in its vicinity. I didn't ask about it. Not yet. The work was physical in a way my old life had never been. My hands cracked and reddened within days. My shoulders ached from hauling insulated containers, from cranking manual overrides when automated systems faltered. Sweat became dangerous. You learned to manage exertion carefully, to avoid overheating beneath layers that would freeze solid if removed too quickly. There was comfort in the routine. Each task had a clear beginning and end. Each mistake carried immediate consequences. The cold did not forgive, but it was fair. Outside, the landscape remained static, a study in white and gray. The sun hung low, never fully committing to rise or set, casting long, weak shadows that barely shifted. Winds scoured the open ground, carrying fine snow that hissed against the buildings like sand. At night, or what passed for night, the sky deepened to a darker slate, the stars sharp and indifferent. I learned the facility's sounds, the steady thrum of compressors, the occasional metallic pop as structures contracted, the soft, almost organic sigh of air cycling through vents. Beneath it all, that low resonance persisted, a vibration felt more than heard. I asked Grant about it once, framing it as idle curiosity. Old foundation, he said. Permafrost shifts. You feel it more than you hear it. He said it the way he said everything else, final, uninterested in elaboration. I accepted it because accepting things was easier than unraveling them. The other workers were few, a rotating cast of 6, including myself. We shared meals in the common room, conversations sparse and utilitarian. Names were exchanged, but stories rarely were. Everyone here seemed to understand that the facility demanded a certain inwardness, a conservation of self. It was on my 4th day that I noticed the smell. Not rot, nothing so crude. It was a faint mineral tang, like iron and ozone, drifting through Wing B during an inspection. It vanished as quickly as it appeared, leaving me unsure whether I'd imagined it. I made a note in the log anyway. Report anomalies. Do not investigate. The rules were starting to feel less like guidelines and more like boundaries. That night, as I lay in my narrow bed, the wind rose outside, howling across the tundra with a voice that seemed almost articulate. The building creaked in response, a low chorus of stressed metal. I found myself listening for other sounds, for footsteps in the hall, for the hum to change pitch. Sleep came in fragments. I dreamed of doors, not opening, never opening, but pressing outward as if something on the other side were testing their integrity. The sensation was subtle, patient. Whatever it was had time. The next morning, Grant assigned me to shadow him during a full system check. We moved methodically, our breath fogging the air in synchronized clouds. When we reached the corridor leading to Wing C, he paused. "You don't go past this point," he said, not looking at me. "I know," I replied. "The rules." He nodded. "Good." He lingered there a moment longer than necessary, his gloved hand resting against the cold metal of the bulkhead. For an instant, so brief I might have imagined it, I thought I saw something like reverence in his posture, or apology. We turned back. Later that day, during a routine audit, I found an entry in the logbook that didn't match the digital records, a unit number that didn't exist on the current map. No location specified. Just a date from decades ago and a notation written in a tight, careful hand. Temperature stable. Containment holding. Holding what? I brought it to Grant's attention, expecting a curt dismissal. Instead, he studied the page for a long time, his jaw working slowly. "Old records," he said finally, "before my time." He took the book from me and replaced it on the shelf, his movements deliberate. "Don't dig through the archives unless you're told to." That was the first time he'd raised his voice, even slightly. I nodded, chastened. But the seed had been planted. As the days passed, the facility began to feel less like a workplace and more like a living system, one that tolerated us as long as we performed our functions correctly. The rules took on weight. I found myself checking my clothing compulsively, ensuring no stray color violated the unspoken order. I avoided empty corridors. I listened. One evening, during a late shift, I heard it. A sound from deep within the facility, distant but distinct. Not machinery, not wind. A slow, measured scrape like something heavy being drawn across ice. I froze, every muscle locked. The sound came again, closer this time, or perhaps clearer. It emanated from behind a sealed unit, its frost-thickened door unmarked and still. My breath came fast, loud in my ears. The rule surfaced in my mind, sharp and absolute. If you hear movement from inside a sealed unit, report it. Do not investigate. I backed away, every step an effort, and reported the anomaly. Grant acknowledged it without comment. The sound did not repeat. That night, the resonance beneath the facility deepened, its rhythm slow and deliberate. As I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, a thought took shape, unwelcome but persistent. The cold was not just preserving things here, it was keeping them quiet. And something, somewhere within the walls, was beginning to stir. The body adapts before the mind has time to object. Within a week, my muscles stopped protesting. The cracks in my hands scabbed over and hardened. My breathing found a steady cadence in the cold, slow, and economical. I learned how to move without sweating, how to layer and unlayer with ritual precision. The facility imposed its rhythm on me, and I accepted it without resistance. There was satisfaction in that, a narrowing of focus. Wake, work, Eat. Sleep. Each action felt weighted, necessary. I no longer checked the date. The outside world receded into abstraction, a concept rather than a presence. When I thought of my old life, screens, traffic, endless noise, it felt like remembering a dream I'd once had in someone else's body. Grant noticed the change. "You're settling in," he said one evening as we logged our final checks. It wasn't praise, exactly, more an observation. "I think so," I replied. He studied me for a moment, then nodded. "That's good. This place doesn't like hesitation." I paused. "The place?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he closed the logbook with care, aligning its edges with the desk. "You'll hear people talk like that," he said. "It's easier than saying what they mean." "What do they mean?" "That the rules aren't suggestions." The conversation ended there. Despite the growing familiarity of my routine, the unease never fully left. It lived in the periphery, surfacing in small, insistent ways. The way frost patterns on certain units resembled organic shapes, branching and curling like veins. The way some corridors felt colder than others, regardless of sensor readings. The way the hum of machinery occasionally slipped out of sync, creating a brief, arrhythmic pause that made my teeth ache. I began to avoid Wing B during late shifts. Not consciously at first. Just a subtle redirection of my path, a preference for routes that felt quieter. It was irrational. The facility was mapped, measured, controlled. But my instincts, long dulled by my previous life, were sharpening in the cold. One night, during a scheduled system recalibration, the lights flickered. Not a failure, more like a blink. A momentary dimming that cast the corridors into deeper shadow before restoring the flat, industrial glow. My heart jumped, then settled. Power fluctuations happened, I logged it and moved on. But afterward, I couldn't shake the sense that something had noticed. Sleep grew heavier, more vivid. My dreams returned to the shelves. Always the shelves. Endless rows of sealed units, each one humming softly, not in unison but in a complex, layered harmony. I would walk among them, my breath echoing too loudly, aware that I was the only warm thing in a place built for cold. In one dream, I found a unit without a label. Its surface was smooth, unmarked by frost, the metal dark and matte. When I placed my hand against it, I felt a vibration, not mechanical but responsive, as if something on the other side had leaned back. I woke with my hand clenched, my palm aching as though I'd pressed it against real steel. The days continued. The cold deepened. Outside, the wind howled with increasing frequency, its voice threading through the facility's structure. Inside, the rules held. Until they didn't. It happened during a routine delivery, a small shipment, rare in winter, flown in under clear skies. I was assigned to assist with intake, working alongside one of the other technicians, a man named Ellis who had arrived a month before me. Ellis was nervous by nature, talkative when he shouldn't be, silent when he should speak up. He fidgeted constantly, adjusting his gloves, tugging at his sleeves. I'd noticed he favored a particular jacket, bright, insulated, with a thin red stripe running along the zipper. I noticed it the moment we stepped inside the main building. "Ellis," I said, my voice low. "Your jacket." He looked down, confused. "What about it?" "The stripe. It's red," he frowned. "It's barely anything, and it's cold as hell out there." "I know," I said, "but the rule..." He laughed, a short, brittle sound. "Come on, that's superstition. Grant even said it's about visibility." The lights hummed overhead, the corridors stretched out, silent and watchful. I hesitated, the words lodged in my throat. "Just be quick," I said. The intake went smoothly at first. The containers were logged, scanned, moved into temporary holding. The cold pressed in, familiar and constant. Ellis worked faster than necessary, his breath coming in sharp bursts. Halfway through the process, the temperature alarms chirped. Not a full alert, just a warning. A localized fluctuation in Wing B. I checked the readings, frowning. The numbers didn't make sense. A drop, sharp and sudden, then stabilization. "Did you see that?" Ellis asked. "Yeah," I said. "Probably a sensor glitch." But even as I said it, the air felt different, thicker. The hum beneath the facility deepened, its rhythm slowing, stretching. The lights dimmed slightly, casting the red stripe on Ellis's jacket into sharper relief. He shifted uncomfortably. You feel that? Yes, I said. Then, from somewhere deep within Wing B came the scrape. Closer than before, heavier, deliberate. Ellis's eyes widened. What the hell is that? Don't move, I said, the rule burning in my mind. Just stay where you are. The scrape came again, followed by a sound I had no language for. A low, resonant exhale that seemed to pass through the walls rather than bounce off them. The temperature dropped another degree. Frost crept visibly along the floor, spiderwebbing toward us. Ellis took a step back, the lights flickered. For an instant, in that stuttering half-light, I thought I saw movement behind one of the sealed units, a bulge, a shifting shadow that pressed outward, then receded. The alarm stopped. The hum returned to its baseline rhythm. The frost halted its advance. Silence reclaimed the corridor. Ellis stood frozen, his face pale beneath his hood. "What was that?" he whispered. I didn't answer. I couldn't. Grant arrived minutes later, summoned by the system logs. He took in the scene at a glance, the readings, the frost, Ellis's jacket. His jaw tightened. "Go change," he told Ellis. "Now." Ellis didn't argue. Afterward, Grant pulled me aside. His voice was low, controlled. "You warned him?" "Yes." He nodded once. "Good." He looked past me, down the corridor toward Wing B, his expression unreadable. "Let this be a lesson," he said. "The rules exist because something here responds to attention." That night, the facility was quieter than ever, and I understood, with a clarity that cut through my lingering doubt, that the cold was not empty, it was aware. After the incident with Ellis, the facility acquired a new quality: vigilance. Nothing in the routine officially changed. The logs remained orderly, the system stabilized, the alarms stayed quiet. But the atmosphere, already heavy with cold, tightened like a muscle held in constant readiness. We moved more carefully, spoke less. Even the hum of the machinery seemed restrained, as if aware it was being listened to. Ellis kept his head down. He switched jackets, traded nervous laughter for a brittle silence. I caught him staring at the sealed units more than once, his eyes flicking away whenever he realized he'd been noticed. A week later, he requested an early rotation out. Grant approved it, without comment. The helicopter came and took Ellis away, shrinking into the gray sky until it vanished. No one said goodbye. I thought that would be the end of it. I was wrong. The rule about red was written, explicit, laminated, easy to follow. What unsettled me more were the rules that weren't, those unspoken patterns I began to notice once my attention sharpened. No one whistled inside the facility, ever. No one ran, even during minor alarms. No one spoke above a conversational tone in Wing B. These behaviors weren't taught. They were absorbed, mimicked, enforced through silence rather than reprimand. When a newer technician once cleared his throat loudly near a sealed unit, the sound echoed too sharply, and every head turned toward him at once. He never did it again. I started keeping my own list, not written, never written, but cataloged internally, the way one learns the moods of a dangerous animal. Grant noticed. "You're paying attention," he said one evening as we completed a late inspection. "That's good. What happens if you don't?" I asked. He didn't answer right away. We stood in a narrow corridor between storage rows, the lights casting long shadows that didn't quite align with their sources. The cold pressed in, constant and intimate. "Then you improvise," he said finally, "and this place hates improvisation." I wanted to ask him how long he'd been here, what he'd seen, what he was afraid of. But the questions felt intrusive, almost rude, like shouting in a church. Some knowledge, I was beginning to understand, demanded patience. It was during an inventory audit that I noticed the first inconsistency. Unit B-17, sealed, logged, untouched for years according to the records, registered a temperature fluctuation so slight it fell within acceptable variance. The system flagged it automatically, then cleared it. No alarm, no action required. Except when I checked the frost pattern on its surface, it had changed. Not melted, rearranged. Where once the ice had formed a uniform crust, it now traced subtle arcs and ridges as if something beneath the metal had shifted position. The pattern reminded me uncomfortably of a rib cage seen through skin. I stared at it longer than I should have. The hum beneath the floor deepened, responding, not loudly, but distinctly. A vibration traveled up through my boots, through my bones, as if the facility itself had become a resonating chamber. I stepped back immediately, heart pounding. Do not investigate. I logged the anomaly. I reported it. Grant acknowledged receipt. That night, my dreams changed again. I wasn't walking the shelves anymore. I was standing still, surrounded by sealed units arranged in a perfect circle. The air was so cold it burned. Each unit hummed at a slightly different frequency, creating a dissonant chord that made my vision blur. Somewhere within that sound, I sensed a pattern, a structure too complex to grasp all at once. In the center of the circle was an absence, not an empty space, but a gap where something should have been. I understood, without knowing how, that whatever occupied that absence had once been contained and was no longer. I woke with the taste of metal in my mouth. The next day, Grant called me into the maintenance office. He closed the door behind us, an unusual gesture. The room was small, utilitarian, warmed by a struggling heater. He gestured for me to sit, and "You've been here long enough," he said, "and you're not stupid." I waited. "There are reasons this facility exists where it does," he continued, "reasons that have nothing to do with logistics or efficiency." "What is it storing?" I asked. He exhaled slowly. "That's the wrong question." He reached into a drawer and removed an old notebook, leather-bound, edges cracked with age. He placed it on the desk between us but did not open it. "This place doesn't just store," he said. "It holds." "Holds what?" Grant met my eyes. For the first time, I saw something like fatigue there. Not physical, existential. "Things that don't obey the same rules we do," he said. "Things that were never meant to be warm." The heater clicked, struggling. Outside the room, the facility hummed, steady and patient. "Why Alaska?" I asked. "Because cold slows things down," he said, "and because there are old understandings up here. Older than the facility, older than the state." He pushed the notebook toward me, just an inch. "There's a rule that isn't written anywhere," he said. "Not on any list, not in any protocol." I felt a tightening in my chest. "What is it?" "You don't try to understand what's being held," Grant said. "You just make sure the holding continues." The words settled heavily between us. "What happens if it doesn't?" I asked. Grant looked past me at the wall as if seeing something far beyond it. "Then the cold stops being enough." That evening, as I made my rounds, I passed Unit B-17 again. The frost had shifted once more, the pattern more pronounced now. I didn't stop. I didn't stare. But as I walked away, I felt it. A subtle pressure at my back, not a gaze, something more intimate, as if the space behind me were leaning forward, attentive. The hum beneath the floor changed pitch just slightly, as if in acknowledgement. I understood then that the rules weren't arbitrary. They weren't even preventative. They were appeasements, and something in the cold had begun to learn my rhythm. The mentor Grant did not speak of the notebook again. In the days that followed our conversation, he returned to his usual reserve, offering instruction only when necessary, correcting mistakes with the same flat efficiency he'd always used. If he noticed the way my attention had sharpened, how I listened more intently, moved more cautiously, he didn't comment on it. Perhaps that was the lesson. Awareness, once earned, was a private burden. I began to see the facility through a different lens. The sealed units were no longer anonymous containers. They were boundaries, each one a negotiation frozen in time. I noticed how their placement avoided perfect symmetry, how corridors subtly curved rather than forming straight lines. The design wasn't sloppy, it was intentional, as if the builders had learned, through trial and error, that certain geometries invited pressure. Grant had been here a long time. That much was clear now. The way he touched the walls when he thought no one was looking. The way he paused before entering certain areas as if listening for permission. He moved like a man in constant dialogue with an environment that did not speak in words. One evening, during a maintenance check that took us into the older sections of the facility, he finally began to talk. "First winter's the hardest," he said, tightening a valve with gloved hands. "People think it's the cold. It's not. What is it then?" I asked. He straightened slowly. It's the silence. You don't realize how much noise you carry with you until it's gone. The lights flickered faintly overhead, not enough to alarm, just enough to remind us of their fragility. I came up here because I needed quiet, Grant continued. Thought if I went far enough north, I'd outrun myself. Did it work? He considered that. Depends what you mean by work. We moved deeper, past areas no longer used for active storage. The air felt older here, the cold less regulated. Frost coated the walls in thick, uneven layers. I could feel the hum more strongly, vibrating through my chest like a second heartbeat. This section predates the current protocols, Grant said, back when people thought you could solve any problem with enough steel and insulation. What problem? I asked. He stopped beside a sealed door smaller than the others. There were no markings on it, no labels, just a heavy latch welded into place, edges buried beneath decades of ice. Containment, he said. The word echoed in the narrow corridor, swallowed quickly by the cold. Grant rested his hand against the door, not touching it directly, but hovering just shy of contact. His fingers trembled, almost imperceptibly. There are places in this country, he said, where the land remembers things we'd rather forget, where rules existed long before laws. People used to respect that, used to listen. What changed? I asked. We got loud, he said simply. We started believing that if something didn't make sense to us, it didn't deserve consideration. The hum deepened, as if in agreement. Grant withdrew his hand. The facility isn't a prison, he said. It's a compromise. I thought of the dreams, the shelves, the absence at the center of the circle. What's on the other side of that compromise? I asked. Grant looked at me then, really looked at me. You don't want to know, he said. Knowing doesn't help you do the job. Then why tell me any of this? Because you're starting to listen, he said. And once you hear it, pretending you don't is worse than ignorance. We returned to the main corridors in silence. That night, the storm came. The wind rose without warning, howling across the tundra with a ferocity that shook the buildings. Snow lashed against the walls, just rattling vents and panels. Visibility dropped to nothing beyond the immediate perimeter lights, which glowed weakly, half swallowed by the white. Inside, the facility responded. Systems compensated. Generators hummed louder. The temperature held, but just barely. Alarms chirped intermittently, never escalating, always resolving on their own. I was on shift when the first true alert sounded. Not from Wing B, from Wing C. The tone was different. Lower, more urgent. Red lights pulsed along the corridor leading to the sealed bulkhead. The air pressure changed, ears popping painfully. Grant appeared at my side almost immediately, his face set. Stay here, he said. I can help, I replied. He shook his head. Not with this. He moved toward Wing C with a speed I hadn't seen from him before, his steps purposeful, almost rehearsed. The bulkhead door hissed as it cycled, seals releasing with a sound like a long, reluctant sigh. For a moment, I saw inside. Not details, just darkness, a deeper dark than the rest of the facility, swallowing the light that spilled in from the corridor. The cold that poured out was different, sharper, carrying with it that metallic tang I'd noticed before. Then the door closed. The alarm ceased. The hum beneath the floor surged, then settled into a new rhythm, slower, heavier. Grant did not return for a long time. When he did, his coat was rimed with frost, his breath coming in short, controlled bursts. He wouldn't meet my eyes. Log it as a pressure anomaly, he said. Resolved. What happened in there? I asked. He paused, his hand on the wall for support. Maintenance, he said. The kind you don't talk about. I wanted to push, to demand answers. But something in his posture warned me away. This was not knowledge to be taken lightly. Later, alone in my room, I found myself thinking of the mentor figures in stories, the ones who guided protagonists toward truth, who illuminated the path forward. Grant was not that kind of mentor. He was a gatekeeper, and the gate he guarded was not meant to be opened. As I lay awake, the storm raging outside, I felt the facility settle around me, its vast, cold presence attentive and patient. The rules held, for now, but I could sense deep in my bones that something within the ice had been disturbed, and it was waiting to see how we would respond. Things that should stay frozen after the alert in Wing C, the facility entered a period of uneasy calm. The storm passed, leaving the tundra buried beneath fresh snow that erased all sense of distance. The sky lightened to a pale, exhausted gray. Systems stabilized. Logs showed nothing beyond acceptable variance. On paper, everything had returned to normal, but the rhythm had changed. I felt it in the way the hum beneath the floor now carried a subtle irregularity, a hesitation between pulses. I felt it in the cold, which seemed less uniform, pooling in certain corridors like standing water. Most of all, I felt it in myself. An alertness that bordered on tension, my senses constantly scanning for deviations I could neither name nor predict. Grant avoided me. Not overtly. He still assigned tasks, still corrected mistakes. But the quiet conversations we'd shared, the oblique lessons, the half-revealed truths, ceased. It was as if, by witnessing the Wing C alert, I'd crossed an invisible threshold. I was closer now. Too close. During my rounds, I found myself lingering near sealed units more often, drawn by a compulsion I struggled to resist. I kept my distance, obeyed the rules, but my attention returned to them again and again. I listened for changes in pitch, I studied frost patterns, memorizing their shapes so I could detect even the slightest rearrangement. It was during one of these inspections that I noticed Unit B-17 again. The frost had receded from its surface, not melted but withdrawn, leaving patches of bare metal exposed. The temperature readings remained stable. The unit's seal showed no breach, and yet the air around it felt warmer, not in any measurable way, but perceptibly, like standing near a living body. I stepped back immediately, heart pounding. The hum deepened, responding to my movement. I felt it travel through the soles of my boots, up my legs, into my chest. It was not aggressive. Not yet. It felt like acknowledgement. I reported the change. Grant acknowledged receipt. No follow-up. That night, my dreams turned oppressive. I was no longer an observer. I was part of the system. Frozen in place, embedded in the walls, my awareness stretched thin across vast distances. I felt the cold as a constant pressure, holding me together, preventing something within me from unfolding. I understood with terrifying clarity that the cold was not my enemy. It was my jailer. I woke gasping, my sheets damp with sweat that chilled me instantly. The room felt too small, the walls pressing in. I sat up, breathing carefully until the panic subsided. From somewhere deep within the facility, a sound carried faintly to my ears. A whisper, not words. Just a suggestion of articulation, like breath moving through a shape not meant for speech. It was distant, easily dismissed as wind or machinery, but I knew better now. The next day, I found Grant in the maintenance office, staring at a monitor without really seeing it. His face looked drawn, older. "You hear it too," I said quietly. He didn't react at first. Then, slowly, he nodded. "It's learning," he said. "What?" I asked. "Us," he replied. "The rhythms, the responses, the rules." I swallowed. "Is that supposed to happen?" "No," Grant said. "It's what happens when something's been held too long." He finally looked at me, his eyes sharp. "Listen to me. Whatever you think you're hearing, whatever you think it wants, you do not engage. You do not respond. Attention is a kind of warmth." The phrase lodged in my mind, unsettling in its simplicity. That evening, I was assigned to a solo shift, a rare occurrence but not unprecedented. The others had retreated to the living quarters, leaving the facility to me and the cold. I moved through the corridors with deliberate care, my footsteps muffled, my breath controlled. Halfway through my rounds, I heard it again, closer this time. The sound came from Wing B, from the direction of B-17. A slow, deliberate movement like something adjusting its position. Metal groaned softly, strained but intact. I stopped. Every instinct screamed at me to leave, to report and retreat. But another impulse rose beneath the fear, a pull, subtle and insistent. The sense that something was waiting, that my presence mattered. I took one step back. The sound stopped. The silence that followed was thick, expectant. The hum beneath the floor shifted, aligning with my heartbeat. "Don't," I whispered to myself. The whisper answered, not audibly, not in any way I could point to, but in sensation, a pressure behind my eyes, a thought that wasn't mine, shaped by something vast and patient. You are warm. The realization hit me like a blow. I staggered, gripping the edge of a nearby shelf to steady myself. The thought receded immediately, leaving behind a ringing emptiness. I didn't investigate. I didn't linger. I logged the anomaly and retreated to the safety of motion, of routine. But the damage was done. From that moment on, the facility no longer felt indifferent to me. It felt as if something within its frozen heart had identified me as a variable worth tracking. Later, as I lay awake staring at the ceiling, I thought of the things we freeze to preserve: food, bodies, memories. I thought of how freezing doesn't stop decay so much as postpone it. Whatever was held here had been waiting, and now it had begun to thaw, not physically, but conceptually, learning the contours of its prison, learning the shape of us. I understood then that the rules weren't just about containment, they were about forgetting. And forgetting, like warmth, was something I was rapidly losing. Grant finally spoke again 3 days later. He found me in the archive room, a narrow, climate-controlled space tucked beneath the main operations wing. Technically, I wasn't breaking any rules by being there. The archives existed to be consulted, but they were rarely used. Their contents considered obsolete, superseded by digital records and revised protocols. Grant didn't ask what I was looking for. He just closed the door behind him and stood there for a long moment, listening to the distant hum of the facility. "You're gonna find things you can't put back," he said. "I already have," I replied. That earned a thin, humorless smile. He stepped closer and pulled a binder from the shelf, one I hadn't noticed before. Its spine was unmarked, its pages yellowed and brittle. "This place wasn't always a cold storage facility," he said, "at least not in the way people think." He opened the binder and slid it across the table. Inside were photocopies of handwritten journals, maps sketched in pencil, photographs so old their edges had blurred into abstraction. The handwriting varied, but the language was consistent, technical, restrained, threaded with unease. The land was flagged decades before construction, Grant continued. Surveyors noticed anomalies, magnetic deviations, temperature inconsistencies, pockets of permafrost that didn't behave like permafrost. I scanned a page, my eyes catching on a phrase underlined repeatedly: persistent cold, independent of climate. Indigenous communities knew, Grant said, they always do, but nobody listened. Or rather, people listened just enough to take notes, then did what they wanted anyway. I turned the page. A photograph showed a shallow excavation pit, its edges rimed with ice despite the summer sun. At the center was a dark shape, indistinct, half-buried. The caption beneath it read, "Initial exposure, immediate temperature drop." "What is it?" I asked. Grant shook his head. That question keeps getting people into trouble. He leaned against the table, his weight causing the old wood to creak. "Whatever it is, it doesn't experience time or individuality or location. It's not a creature, it's a condition. A condition." The word sent a chill through me that had nothing to do with the temperature. "They tried destroying it," Grant went on. "Heat, pressure, chemical agents. Nothing worked. The more energy they introduced, the more unstable things became." I thought of his warning. Attention is a kind of warmth. "So they froze it," I said. "They froze around it," Grant corrected. "Built layers, protocols, rules. The facility isn't a container. It's an interface, a way to negotiate proximity." I flipped through more pages, notes describing early containment failures, equipment malfunctions, workers reporting auditory hallucinations, intrusive thoughts, dreams of vast spaces and impossible geometries. "They didn't call it a breach," Grant said quietly. "They called it an awakening." The hum beneath our feet deepened, as if the building itself were reacting to the conversation. "What happens if it wakes up?" I asked. Grant closed the binder. "It doesn't wake up," he said. "It remembers." We left the archive room in silence. That night, the facility felt thinner, as if the layers Grant had described, steel, ice, rules, were no longer sufficient to muffle whatever lay beneath. I could feel it pressing outward, not physically, but cognitively. Ideas surfaced unbidden. Images flickered at the edges of my vision. During my rounds, I passed Unit B-17 again. This time, the frost had formed a pattern so intricate it hurt to look at, interlocking curves that suggested symmetry without ever achieving it. My head throbbed, a pressure building behind my eyes. I forced myself to keep moving. In Wing A, a temperature sensor failed outright, its display filling with static before going dark. I replaced it quickly, my hands shaking. The cold here felt different now, not just an absence of heat, but a presence with texture, with intent. Later, in the common room, I overheard two technicians speaking in hushed tones. "Did you hear it last night?" one asked. "Yeah," the other replied. "Thought it was just the wind." It wasn't. They fell silent when they noticed me listening. Sleep, when it came, was merciless. I dreamed of the land before the facility, open tundra beneath a wide sky. I saw people standing in a circle, their faces painted, their breath steaming in the cold. They spoke words I didn't understand, their voices low and rhythmic. At the center of the circle, the air itself seemed to bend, light warping around an absence that made my stomach twist. The cold descended then, not from above, but from within the earth, a deliberate act, a binding. I woke with a start, the echo of those voices still ringing in my ears. The next morning, Grant informed us that Wing B would be under restricted access until further notice. No explanation given, no timeline offered. As the others dispersed, he caught my eye. "It's getting closer," he said. "Not physically, conceptually." "What does that mean?" I asked. "It means it's starting to understand us," Grant replied. "And understanding is the first step toward being remembered." Outside, the wind picked up again, sweeping across the tundra with a low, mournful sound. Inside, the facility held barely. I felt the weight of history pressing down, layers of forgotten rules and broken promises frozen beneath my feet. Whatever was beneath the ice had been waiting a very long time, and now it was beginning to recall why. Knowing changes the texture of things. After the archive room, after Grant's quiet confession, the facility no longer presented itself as a place of work, but as a layered argument, one that had been ongoing for generations, conducted in steel, ice, and ritualized restraint. Every corridor felt annotated, every sealed unit a footnote to some larger unfinished thought. The price of that knowledge was immediacy. I could no longer move through the facility on habit alone. Each step required attention. Each sound demanded interpretation. The hum beneath the floor, once a background constant, now arrived in distinct movements, rises and falls that mirrored something like respiration. When it slowed, my own breath slowed with it. When it surged, anxiety followed. I was not imagining this. I knew better than to lie to myself now. The others felt it too. Conversations dwindled to functional exchanges. No one lingered in corridors. Meals were eaten quickly, eyes averted as though prolonged proximity might encourage something to listen in. Sleep deprivation etched itself into faces. A shared understanding settled over us. The rules were holding, but only just. Grant deteriorated the fastest. He lost weight. His movements grew stiff, less economical. I caught him standing still more often, head tilted slightly, as if listening to something just beyond range. Once, I saw frost creeping up his gloves while he stood motionless beside a sealed unit, unaware of the cold biting into him. "Grant," I said sharply. He blinked, startled, then flexed his fingers as if they'd gone numb. "Can't let it think you're offering yourself," he muttered, more to himself than to me. "Think?" I asked. He didn't answer. The first true psychological break occurred on a night shift, 3 weeks after the Wing C alert. I was in the operations room when the cameras flickered, not off, just enough distortion to warp the image. The feed from Wing B stuttered, then stabilized. I leaned closer to the monitor. Unit B-17 was no longer centered in frame. I checked the timestamp. No cut, no interruption. The unit had not moved, but the camera's perspective had shifted as though the corridor itself had subtly reoriented around it. My mouth went dry. The frost patterns were gone, not melted, not rearranged, gone entirely, leaving bare, dark metal that absorbed the light around it. The temperature reading remained unchanged, perfectly stable. I reported it immediately. Grant arrived within minutes, his face pale. He stared at the monitor for a long time, then reached up and shut the screen off. "It's testing thresholds," he said. "Whose?" I asked. "Ours." Alarms began to chirp throughout the facility, not simultaneously, but in sequence like a slow cascade. Each one resolved before escalating, yet the cumulative effect was unmistakable. A probing, a mapping. The hum beneath the floor synchronized with the alarms, weaving them into a rhythm that made my skull ache. "Why now?" I asked. Grant closed his eyes. "Because it's learned enough," he said. "Patterns, responses, weak points. From us, from everyone who's ever been here," he replied. "We're just the most recent variables." The whisper returned that night, not in my ears, but behind my thoughts. A pressure that shaped ideas without language, impressions without images. I felt myself being examined, not as an individual, but as a configuration. Warmth, attention, memory. You notice, you remain. I slammed my hands against the metal table in my room, the shock grounding me in pain. The pressure receded, leaving behind a hollowed calm that frightened me more than the intrusion itself. Sleep became impossible. When I closed my eyes, I saw impossible geometries unfolding in the dark, angles that bent inward, spaces that overlapped without intersecting. I began to understand why the builders had avoided symmetry. Certain shapes invited alignment. During a mandatory rest period, I found myself standing outside, staring across the tundra. The wind cut through my layers, but I barely felt it. The horizon stretched endlessly, a blank canvas that suddenly felt less empty than the facility behind me. I understood then the temptation. Out here, nothing was contained, nothing negotiated. The land did not argue, it absorbed. The thought frightened me because it made sense. Grant joined me, his breath fogging the air. "You're thinking about leaving," he said. "I'm thinking about distance," I replied. He nodded. "It doesn't like distance." "What is it like?" I asked. Grant hesitated. "Continuity," he said. "Witness." The word lodged in my chest. "Is that why you stay?" I asked. "Because someone has to watch it?" "Yes," he said. "And because if no one remembers the rules, they stop working." A tremor ran through the ground beneath our feet, so subtle I might have missed it weeks ago. Now it felt unmistakable. "What happens if the rules fail?" I asked. Grant didn't answer immediately. When he did, his voice was barely audible over the wind. "Then it won't need the cold anymore." That night, the facility's internal temperature dropped across all wings simultaneously, a controlled response to an uncontrolled stimulus. Frost bloomed along walls and ceilings in intricate patterns that mirrored those from my dreams. The hum deepened into something like a chord, resonant and sustained. I felt a sharp pain behind my eyes, a sense of pressure building, as if something were pressing outward from inside my skull. Knowledge, I realized, was not passive. It was a bridge, and whatever lay beneath the ice had begun to cross it. The facility crossed a line the night the temperature failed to recover. Protocols accounted for fluctuation, for localized drops, for cascading sensor errors, and temporary system desynchronization. They did not account for uniform decline without mechanical cause. They did not account for cold that deepened with intention. By the time the internal temperature fell 5 degrees below baseline across all wings, the alarms were no longer chirping. They were silent. Silence, in a place built on constant monitoring, was catastrophic. I was in Wing A when it happened, my breath fogging in dense clouds as the lights to emergency levels. Frost spread along the floor in rapid branching patterns that no longer resembled chance. The hum beneath the facility slowed, stretched, then settled into a low, sustained resonance that vibrated through my bones. It felt like anticipation. I ran, not fast, but decisively, back toward operations. The rule against running existed for a reason, I understood now. Sudden motion drew attention, but attention had already been given. The facility was fully engaged. Grant was there when I arrived, standing over the main console, his face illuminated by the cold glow of emergency displays. The readings made no sense. Cooling systems were operating at maximum capacity, yet the ambient temperature continued to fall, not just in the air, but in the structure itself. "It's decoupling," Grant said, his voice steady despite the chaos. "The cold is no longer just environmental." "What does that mean?" I asked, though part of me already understood. "It means it's no longer relying on us to maintain the boundary." A deep vibration rolled through the floor, stronger than before. Somewhere in the facility, metal groaned, not the sharp protest of stressed steel, but a low, deliberate sound, like something stretching after a long confinement. Wing B's access indicators lit up one by one. Not alarms, invitations. "No," Grant said softly. "On the main display, Unit B-17's status changed. Containment. Inactive." The words sat there, impossible and final. "That's not possible," I said. Grant didn't answer. He was already moving, pulling on insulated gloves like grabbing a portable thermal regulator from the wall. His movements were urgent but controlled, the motions of someone performing a ritual he had hoped never to repeat. "You stay here," he said. "I'm not doing that," I replied. He turned on me, his expression fierce. "This isn't heroics. It's math. It responds to presence, to continuity. 2 witnesses are worse than 1. The ground shuddered again, this time strong enough to rattle equipment. The hum rose in pitch, becoming almost audible as a tone, deep, resonant, impossibly vast. From somewhere deep within Wing B, I felt it more than heard it. A shift. Not movement through space, but through state. Like ice becoming water without melting. Like a thought finishing itself. Grant closed his eyes briefly. When he opened them, there was resignation there, and something else. Resolve. "I've been part of the boundary too long," he said. "It knows me, anticipates me." "What are you saying?" I asked. "I'm saying it needs continuity," Grant replied, "and tonight it's going to get it one way or another." He turned toward the corridor leading to Wing B. I broke the rule then. Not the written ones. The deeper one Grant had warned me about, the one that kept distance between knowing and acting. I followed him. "Don't," he said, without turning around. "I won't engage," I said. "I won't speak. I won't draw attention." He stopped, finally looking back at me. "You already have," he said. "You wouldn't be able to hear it otherwise." The corridor to Wing B was colder than anything I'd experienced before. The air felt viscous, resisting movement. Frost coated the walls in thick, layered sheets that reflected the emergency lights in fractured patterns. Each step sent vibrations through the floor that echoed back out of sync. We reached B-17. The unit's surface was no longer metal. It was dark, matte, and impossibly deep, absorbing light rather than reflecting it. The edges of the door blurred as if the boundary between object and space had softened. The temperature reading hovered at an impossible number, fluctuating without pattern. Grant approached slowly, regulator humming in his hands. "This is where the rule breaks," he said quietly. "Not because we disobey it, but because it outgrows it." The whisper surged, filling my head with pressure. "Witness. Remain." Grant pressed the regulator against the surface of the unit. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the cold screamed. Not audibly, but conceptually. A surge of absence flooded the corridor, stripping sensation from my skin, my thoughts slowing as if submerged. I fell to one knee, gasping, my vision fracturing into overlapping geometries. Grant cried out, not in pain, but in recognition. "I remember," he said. The surface of B-17 rippled, not outward but inward, collapsing into itself like a pupil dilating. The hum rose into a chord that resolved into something dangerously close to coherence. I understood then. The facility was never meant to hold it forever. It was meant to teach it something. Limitation, witness, pattern. Grant stood at the threshold, his form blurring, his outline losing definition as the cold wrapped around him, not freezing, but incorporating. "You have to leave," he said, his voice already distant. "Distance is the only thing it can't learn fast enough." The unit pulsed once, twice. Grant was gone. Not taken, not destroyed. Integrated. The corridor fell silent. The temperature stabilized. On the main console far away, a status changed. Containment reconfigured. I lay on the floor, shaking, the weight of what I'd witnessed pressing down on me with crushing clarity. The rule had been broken, and in breaking it, something had been satisfied. But satisfaction, I knew now, was not the same as completion. It was only a pause, and I was the only witness left. The facility did not mourn Grant. There were no alarms, no formal notices, no ritual beyond the quiet recalibration of systems and the steady return of numbers to acceptable ranges. The temperature normalized. The hum beneath the floor settled into a familiar, almost comforting rhythm. On paper, the incident resolved itself. In practice, everything was different. I moved through the corridors alone now. The others had been evacuated under the guise of emergency rotation. Weather instability, structural concerns, corporate liability. Helicopters came and went, lifting warm bodies away from the tundra like afterthoughts. No one asked me to leave. No one asked me to stay. The facility did not need to. Grant's absence was not an emptiness. It was a redistribution. I felt him in the rhythms, the slight delay before a compressor engaged, the way certain corridors seemed to anticipate my approach. When I passed the threshold to Wing B, the cold pressed in with a familiarity that bordered on intimacy. I understood then what Grant had meant by continuity. He had not been consumed. He had been preserved. Unit B-17 no longer existed in any meaningful way. The designation remained in the system, but the physical marker was gone, replaced by a stretch of wall indistinguishable from the rest. And yet, I could feel it. An absence with weight, a conceptual density that bent attention around it. The whispers stopped after that night, not because the presence was gone, but because it no longer needed to speak. It had learned enough. It had acquired a reference point that existed within its own framework now, a human pattern embedded deep within its cold logic. Grant. I found his notebook in the maintenance office days later. Not the leather-bound one from the archives, but a personal log, unofficial, unmonitored. The entries grew shorter as time went on, handwriting tightening, margins shrinking. The cold is not the threat. The cold is the language. What it preserves is not bodies. It is structure. The final entry was undated. Someone will have to remember how this ends. I closed the notebook and felt the facility respond, not with pressure, but with alignment. The hum beneath my feet synchronized with my breathing. The lights steadied. I had become a variable. The days blurred together. Without other workers, the routine simplified, then intensified. I slept less, ate when necessary. The cold no longer bit at my skin the way it once had. I acclimated, not physiologically, but perceptually. The absence of warmth became a constant reference, a baseline against which everything else was measured. I stopped dreaming of shelves. Instead, I dreamed of maps, vast, abstract diagrams that overlaid the tundra, the facility, and something beneath both. Lines intersected and diverged, forming containment shapes that only made sense when viewed from impossible angles. At the center of every configuration was the same principle: distance. Distance was the only thing it could not fully resolve. One night during a system check, I noticed a new status indicator. Observer active. The designation sat there quietly, unadorned. I did not log it. I understood my role now, not as a technician, Freya Life, not even as a caretaker, as a witness. The facility did not need constant intervention anymore. It needed memory, someone to remember the rules, not as text, but as lived constraint. Someone who understood that the cold was not a weapon, but a boundary condition, a way to slow comprehension, to fracture attention. Grant had given it continuity. I was giving it context. Outside, the winter deepened. Storms came and went. Supply drops arrived less frequently than not at all. Corporate messages stopped. The world beyond the tundra receded into abstraction, just as my old life once had. I thought sometimes about leaving. The thought no longer frightened me. It simply felt irrelevant. The facility did not prevent departure. That was the most unsettling part. The boundary was not enforced through force, but through understanding. I knew that if I left without replacement, without memory, the rules would degrade. The cold would hold for a while. Then it would learn faster. One evening, as I stood outside beneath a sky alive with pale aurora, the ground beneath my feet vibrated gently. Not a warning, not a demand, an acknowledgement. I placed my gloved hand against the outer wall of the facility and felt the resonance answer, deep, vast, patient. "I remember," I said aloud. The cold did not respond. It did not need to, because what it preserved now was no longer just what lay beneath the ice. It preserved the role. And as long as I remained listening, recording, remembering, the boundary would hold. For now. But preservation, I had learned, was not permanence. It was only time. Time behaves strangely when nothing marks it. Without rotations, without new faces, without the small disruptions that once punctuated the routine, days ceased to distinguish themselves from one another. The facility entered a steady state, and so did I. The cold no longer felt hostile. It was simply there, an omnipresent constant like gravity or memory. I stopped checking the calendar altogether. The systems required less intervention now. Readings stabilized with minimal adjustment. The hum beneath the floor maintained its measured cadence, neither rising nor falling. Whatever recalibration had occurred the night Grant disappeared had settled into equilibrium. But equilibrium is not the same as safety. I knew that as intimately as I knew my own breathing. The dreams faded gradually, not into peace, but into absence. When I slept, there was nothing. No shelves, no geometries, no voices. Just black, uninterrupted rest. At first, I welcomed it. Later, I understood it as a courtesy. I was no longer being instructed. I was being trusted. The facility responded to me now in subtle ways. Doors unlocked a fraction of a second before I reached them. Lights brightened just enough to accommodate my approach. Once, during a routine check, I reached for a valve that had frozen in place and found it already loosened, as though anticipating the need. These were not miracles. They were efficiencies. I had become part of the pattern. The final message from the outside world arrived without ceremony. A single transmission, delayed by weeks, its timestamp nearly meaningless. Operations suspended indefinitely. Site considered stable. No further personnel assignments scheduled. I deleted it. Stability, I had learned, was a relative term. The first sign of thaw came not from the facility, but from the land. A subtle shift in the wind. A change in the way snow drifted along the outer walls. The temperature outside rose by a fraction of a degree, insignificant by any reasonable metric, but enough to register, enough to matter. The ground beneath the facility vibrated in response, a low murmur of adjustment. I felt it immediately. Distance, I realized, was eroding. Not here, not yet, but elsewhere. The world beyond the tundra was warming, changing, accelerating. The rules that governed this place had been written for a colder age, an age of patience and restraint, an age that understood how to wait. I stood in the operations room, staring at the displays, and understood the final truth Grant had been circling all along. The facility was never meant to last forever. It was a stopgap, a pause, a way to buy time while humanity forgot enough to survive itself. The cold, preserved structure, yes, but structure eventually failed under pressure, not from within, but from without, from the gradual erosion of distance. That night, I went to Wing C alone. The bulkhead opened without resistance. Inside, there was nothing to see, no object, no form, just space, dense, cold, attentive. I did not step inside. I did not speak. I stood at the threshold and did what I had been trained to do. I remembered. I remembered the rules as they had once been spoken and as they had later been lived. I remembered Grant's voice, steady and tired. I remembered the world I had left behind, the noise, the warmth, the meaninglessness I had mistaken for safety, and I understood, finally, why I had come here. Not to escape, but to slow things down. The vibration beneath my feet eased, settling into stillness. The cold held, for now. I don't know how long I will remain. Perhaps until my attention fades. Perhaps until the world beyond the ice forgets enough to require remembrance again. Or perhaps until distance collapses entirely and the rules must be taught anew, somewhere warmer, louder, less patient. When that happens, there will be signs, anomalies, whispers at the edge of thought. People will feel the cold without understanding why, and someone somewhere will make a choice. Until then, I work, I watch, I remember, because what lies beneath the ice does not want to escape. It wants to be known. And knowing, I have learned, is the most dangerous form of warmth there is. I began this account because something changed again. Not abruptly, not violently, Change here never announces itself that way. It arrives as misalignment, a hairline fracture between expectation and response, a delay where there was once anticipation, a silence that lasts a breath too long. It started with the cold returning its edge. For months, years perhaps, the temperature inside the facility had remained within a narrow, obedient band. The cold had been deep but neutral and agreed upon constant. Then, gradually, it sharpened, not colder in number but in sensation. The air regained its bite. Frost patterns grew more elaborate, less efficient, as though indulging in excess. Aesthetic rather than function. I noted it without alarm. I have learned the difference between warning and expression. Outside, the changes were clearer. The snowpack thinned earlier each season. The permafrost softened in places it never had before, creating shallow depressions that filled with dark meltwater. The land exhaled, releasing old smells. Iron, rot, things long sealed away. The distance Grant spoke of was narrowing, not just conceptually, but physically. The world was getting closer. I received visitors for the first time in a long while. Not people. Signals. They arrived as background noise in the communications array, unstructured transmissions that too diffuse to be intentional, but too patterned to be random. Static with cadence, interference that repeated at irregular but meaningful intervals. The facility noticed before I did. Systems reallocated processing priority without my input. Non-essential functions dimmed. Internal monitoring intensified around the older wings, the ones closest to the deep boundaries where containment had been conceptual rather than physical for a very long time. I stood in operations and watched the indicators shift. Active boundary, stressed. A new line appeared beneath them. Memory, required. I felt no fear, only fatigue. This is the part no one prepares you for, the maintenance of meaning. The slow erosion of certainty, knowing that vigilance does not stop the end, it only shapes how it arrives. I returned to Grant's notebook, reading it again from the beginning. The early entries felt almost naive now, concerned with procedures, tolerances, compliance. Later pages carried the weight I recognized, the dawning understanding that the rules were not safeguards, but stories we told ourselves to slow comprehension. Rules as narrative, rules as insulation. The final page, which I had read countless times, revealed something new to me then, not in its words, but in its absence. There were no instructions for what came after preservation failed, no guidance for thaw, because thaw was not an event, it was a process. That night, the facility spoke again, not in whispers, not in pressure, in clarity. I was standing at the threshold of Wing B, what remained of it, when the air thickened and the cold aligned itself around a single idea. Not language, not sound, intent. It did not want to breach. It did not want to spread. It wanted succession. Grant had given it continuity. I had given it context. But context decays when isolated. Meaning requires translation. Exposure. Friction. The world beyond the ice was changing faster now, warming, accelerating, forgetting. Distance was collapsing not because the thing beneath the facility was advancing, but because humanity was approaching it again, repeating old mistakes with new tools, digging deeper, preserving less, listening poorly. The facility could not follow, but I could. The realization settled into me with a weight that felt almost gentle. I understood, then, why departure had never been forbidden, why the rules emphasized behavior, not location, why witness mattered more than walls. The cold does not move easily. People do. I began to prepare, not an escape, a transition. I documented everything, not in technical language, but in narrative. I rewrote the rules as stories, parables, instructions disguised as superstition. I archived them redundantly, seeding them into systems that would outlive the facility's relevance, not facts. Warnings. Before I left, I stood one last time beneath the aurora, the sky alive with shifting light that felt thinner than it used to. The ground beneath me hummed faintly, a farewell without sentiment. I remember, I said. The cold answered, not with acknowledgement, but with release. I do not know what will become of this place once I am gone. Perhaps it will hold longer than expected. Perhaps it will fade quietly, its purpose fulfilled. What I do know is this. The rules were never meant to be kept forever. They were meant to be carried. And somewhere warmer, louder, less patient, someone will hear a story that does not quite make sense and feel a chill they cannot explain. When that happens, the long memory will continue, not in ice, but in people.